I want to talk about the Dallas Mavericks and the Los Angeles Lakers. Two teams that obviously had a major shakeup going back to the Luka and Anthony Davis trade and are still in the process of adjusting. Let's start with the Mavericks because I like bad news before good news, and the Mavericks only have bad news on their plate. So they fire Nico Harrison. Who saw that coming? I didn't see this team being as poor as they look coming out of the gate. I wish I had recognized how much of an offensive mess this roster is. In hindsight, that should have been easier to see because they just have too many big bodies and no breathing room. And I fear that it's impacting Cooper Flagg's development a little bit. The fact that he's having to play point guard is a problem. There should be a guard getting him the ball. If you remember last season, I praised the Spurs for going out and getting Chris Paul just as a developmental piece for Victor Wembanyama. That's the sort of thinking that Dallas should have had in mind, but instead they're asking a rookie with a lot on his shoulders, a lot of expectations being not only the number one overall pick, but a very highly sought after and praised number one pick who's supposed to be this, great player for years to come. They're going to make that guy play out of position and set up all these other veteran teammates. Just doesn't bode well for his development, in my opinion. It's not ideal. I want to talk about Nico Harrison getting let go because I think, I'm seeing all across the NBA media today, everybody just pouring dirt on Nico's grave. And it just brings me back to in my previous episode when I talked about a conspiracy theory when it came to the Luka trade. My conspiracy theory, well, it's not mine, but one that I believe had some truth to it, was that ownership was sort of angling to go to Vegas and needed the league's approval on that. And so they kind of did this to make their team movable out of the Dallas market and away from the fans and to be at the front of the line for the teams that get stood up in Vegas. Whether that's true or not, who knows? But the point is that this decision was made at the ownership level. I think anybody who tries to argue legitimately that Nico Harrison came up with this trade and brought it to ownership and really thought it was a good idea, there's just very little to support that idea. It's completely out of character for him. He had just gotten done making trades to build the team around Luka, and the team made a finals run. Went out and got Kyrie Irving at a very shrewd trade, a good move to acquire an asset that was depreciated and carried some risk. Drafted Derek Lively, traded for PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford at the deadline, and the team just took off and with a hot streak, making a finals run, obviously. That team is designed to play around Luka. The idea that he would then take the foundation of that roster and trade it for Anthony Davis, a very established veteran player in his 30s with a shorter career window who's dealt with plenty of injuries, to bring him into a team that was designed for Luka, that's not a win-now move. The term win now gets attached to it because of Anthony Davis's age, but you're not going to make a major move like that and win immediately. The same was true for the Lakers acquiring Luka. We'll get to them in a bit. Acquiring Anthony Davis to this team made an imbalanced roster that had to be adjusted, and that adjustment period takes a year or two, at least 1 year. You're not going to win immediately. You need time to recognize on the court what's missing and to go out and get those pieces, and you have to make sure you have the assets to do it. And then lucking into Cooper Flagg didn't help the situation either because it just brought another big forward into the mix, and that was the last thing they needed. They're lucky they got Cooper Flagg, obviously, but it didn't help their roster balance at all. And so this idea that they were doing the move to win now just never made any sense. The press conferences he's had to do since that trade took place where pretty much every reporter is like, what the hell is wrong with you? And he's having to sit there and act like it was a good idea. He knows it's not a good idea. He built a team around Luka, and you think he traded him away willingly? I don't think so. They wanted Luka moved. They didn't want to pay him the supermax. I think that was the main reason. And they said, you're going to take it in the teeth for doing this, and you're going to sit out there and act like it was your idea, and then we're going to let you go next season because it's obviously not going to work. And that's how it played out. And now Nico Harrison's never going to get another NBA job, and he's probably just going to go back to working for Nike or whoever. So I think that's how it went down. It's the most logical explanation. The question now is Dallas going to start a fire sale? Michael Finley and I forgot who the other front office executive is are now co-GMs for the Dallas Mavericks. And I think that their marching orders are going to be trade Clay if you can, trade PJ Washington, trade Daniel Gafford. The idea is to go into next season with Kyrie and Cooper Flagg and Anthony Davis. We'll see how healthy Anthony Davis is, but that's the idea. Clear out a lot of this roster clutter, try to get some picks, and let's tank this year. And you know that because there's already reports that the Mavericks are wanting to hold out Anthony Davis with a calf injury. He wants to play. His camp wants him to play. The team does not. I think it's because they see that this is a season that's going to be mediocre at best, and they just would prefer to tank. And I don't know what protection they have on their pick this year, but that's more incentive if it's like top 6 protected or whatever. So I think that's something to look out for. I think Clay could basically be had for whoever wants to trade for him. I would look out for the Warriors acquiring him. I think that would be a nice story. I could see that happening. But I think that this team is going to try to be as bad as they can this year. I think that's what this firing signals. And then they'll go into next offseason hiring a new GM who's going to be tasked with drafting someone at the top of the lottery and building a team around Cooper Flagg while also gracefully phasing out Kyrie and AD. I don't think that either of those guys would get traded this year, but I wouldn't put it past the team to do it in the offseason. So that's what I think is in the immediate future for the Mavericks. Now, about the Lakers. The Lakers look great. Luka looks awesome. Austin Reeves looks amazing in a contract year. Rui's playing well. The role players are playing well. This is not a championship contender. Any sort of championship expectations for this team are from the media and the fans. The Lakers front office understands that they're not a championship contender. And I know that because they weren't willing to risk any of their trade assets in the summer. And I applaud them for that. It showed an incredible amount of restraint. They stuck to the commandments. They understand that there's plenty to do here. They acquired Luka. They have had him on their team for less than a year. There's some remaneuvering to do with this roster in order to make it a championship contender with Luka at the top. And it starts with building up your assets so that you have moves you can make. This offseason, they had, I think, 1 unprotected pick they could trade, and I think they could trade 2 swaps, and that was it. And that's just not good enough to get, you could pull off 1 trade with that. But that's not good enough to do a variety of moves that they'll need to adjust around him in the next couple of years. I think Reeves is very solidly a number 2. I think Rui is a 4th starter. I think they're going to draft a big man in this upcoming draft to be their center. And I think that they're going to use the LeBron money and they're going to sign a 5th starter plus probably another bench player. And that'll be their group with Dalton Connect and Vanderbilt. And, they'll still have DeAndre under contract. They'll probably still have Marcus Smart. But then those guys make sense. The roles they're in now are too big. They need a couple more pieces. And they know that. And they need trades they can make. Just got done talking about the Mavericks. They made the PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford trades. The Lakers understand that they need to be able to make trades like that during the season. Sometimes you have to wait for your assets to kind of rebuild. They need more tradable picks. And they also didn't bring back Dorian Finney-Smith. And so that tells me that this team understands that they're not close. They could win a first-round playoff series. If they got very lucky, they could win a second round. They cannot make a finals run. They just don't have enough two-way players. We saw that in the playoffs last year against Minnesota. JJ played those 5 guys the entire second half because they're the only ones who could put together both a viable offensive and defensive lineup. The minute he went to Jackson Hayes or Jared Vanderbilt or Gabe Vincent, somebody like that, he was either sacrificing offensively or defensively, and Minnesota was attacking that weakness. In a playoff series, it comes down to having as few weaknesses as possible, and that comes from having two-way players in your rotation. And the Lakers, just the only ones they had outside of their big 3 were Finney-Smith and Hachimura. So the fact that the Lakers let Finney-Smith walk tells you that they know that they're not going to win the title in the next year or 2. So what's the prudent thing to do? If that's the case, you build up your assets, make it so in year 3, you can make that finals run. And I think that they'll be in an excellent position to do that. They'll have Luka still in his 20s, Reeves still in his 20s, Hachimura is young still. But they'll have plenty of trade assets, and they'll have plenty of guys on the roster who now have continuity, who've been playing together with a coach that they've been growing with. That's the formula for a championship run. You don't just win a title suddenly. They have some series to win. They'll make their way there. But I wanted to talk about them because I wanted to pump the brakes on any sort of talk of them being a contender, and also any criticism that they're going to get once they lose in the playoffs, because they are not going to beat Denver, Oklahoma City, Houston, or Minnesota. They are not going to win a 7-game series against any one of those teams. If they happen to match up with anyone else, then sure, I could see them knocking off San Antonio. I could see them beating Golden State, but they're not beating one of those 4 teams, and they know that. And so I just want to end on LeBron, because LeBron's got an interesting place in this whole thing. He hasn't played yet. And I think the plan for LeBron this year is to just bounce in and out of the lineup, try not to get hurt, get himself some more stats to add to his resume, make a playoff run, and then I think he's out. And that's because the Lakers are no longer a situation that he prefers to be in. LeBron, since he left the Heat, he has enormous leverage to make the team function the way he wants them to make the situation as best for him as he can. And so that means maximizing the team's ceiling immediately, in the immediate year, the following year. None of this talk that I just got through saying where you need trade assets, you need to be able to make adjustments. He wants you to do all that now so that he has the best chance possible of winning the title. And he could do that because he's LeBron James. So I don't think it's selfish. I don't think that there's an ego involved in telling the teams what to do, or that he's any of those diva sort of labels that athletes that impose on teams tend to get. I think it's just him exercising his leverage, and it's smart. When he goes and plays for a team, the amount of value he creates for that team is crazy compared to what he actually gets paid. So he understands that, and he enters into a business relationship with the team. This is what you need to do for me, or else I'm not interested in playing here anymore. And so going back to the situation with the Lakers, that's been the case. They did the AD trade, and they went out and did the Russ trade, and they traded their draft picks and anything they could to try to make the team as good as they could. They won a ring. They haven't been close since, but that's how they've operated the team, the way LeBron's wanted them to. Now that they have Luka, they have a greater motivation to look years in advance. And that's, LeBron's not bitter about that. He understands who Luka is and what the Lakers need to do. And that's why he's going to move on. This is no longer a situation that can cater to his needs. Now, where he'll go, I believe it'll be Cleveland. And that's because, it's a nice story for the narrative. A lot of a player's legacy, I think, comes down to storytelling and narrative, oddly enough. That he started his career with Cleveland, went to Miami, went back to Cleveland, went to LA, and then finished up in Cleveland. It's kind of tidy. And I think that stuff like that matters. But more importantly, Cleveland is right there knocking on the door to a title. They're in a weak East with only really the Knicks to contend with. And then we'll see what we get out of teams like Indiana next year, and Boston, and possibly Orlando or Detroit. But much clearer path in the West. There's a spot in the starting lineup for him, and so I think he's going to finish out his contract here this year with the Lakers. He's going to sign a veteran minimum, or whatever Cleveland can sign him to go play there, and he's going to start with Mobley, Jared Allen, Donovan Mitchell, and Darius Garland, and Cleveland's going to go for it, and they're going to say, okay, LeBron, come here for 2 years. We want you to show these guys what a deep finals run looks and feels like. We're going to try to get you one, and then when you leave, we're going to expect to keep going back. And Cleveland's got trades they can make, and they can cater to LeBron's needs. So I think that situation is the only one that makes sense, both from a familiarity perspective and from a championship odds perspective.